can I thank you for inviting me here to address your conference today. And can I also thank all of you for the work that you do as elected representatives across Scotland's communities, because just like the work that our elected shop stewards do, we know that your role is often a thankless task, but it is one that's really crucial to a thriving democracy, to thriving workplaces and to thriving communities right across Scotland. And I address all of you as a representative of over 560,000 unionised workers in Scotland who belong to Scotland's trade union movement. And as you know, many of them work in local government, delivering a whole range of different crucial services that you're responsible for. And I address you, as has been said, during some of the most challenging times that I think local government has faced in generations. We've seen severe fiscal constraints coupled with growing demands on local government services. And you've had to survive years of pretty relentless austerity. Ever since the banking crisis in 2008, I think that's marked a real turning point for local government. You've had to support our communities through a global pandemic, which I think, and has been shown by the COVID inquiry so far, that has really exposed the lack of resilience and preparedness in our public sector for such crisis. And it's not a matter of if it will happen again, it's a matter of when it might happen again. And you've also, really hot on the heels of that pandemic, had to deal with a cost of living crisis, a really deep and serious cost of living crisis that embedded levels of wage stagnation not seen since the Napoleonic Wars by the people of this country. And as a result, we've actually seen exponential growth not economically, but growth in poverty. We've seen food poverty up, energy poverty up, in-work poverty all up. And the only things that are really coming down are people's sense of hope in far too many of our communities. So while that demand of services has never been greater, the public service cuts agenda in Scotland, as we all know, has never been deeper. We've seen over 60,000 jobs lost in the last 20 years across Scotland's public sector. We've seen severe cuts to many local government services and areas of critical infrastructure, as was said by Paul Kelly, like the care sector, are in utter meltdown at this time. We've got a Scottish Fiscal Commission telling us that we've got a £5 billion hole in Scotland's public finances, and yet Scottish and UK governments still dodge the radical decisions on tax, on wealth, on income needed to really grow our economy. And trade unions don't dispute that public sector efficiency is very important and could benefit from genuine innovation, skills development, utilising new technologies. We're up for that. But far too often in the past, we've seen efficiency being used as a cover for top-down jobs cuts. And I have to say, it's an approach that we fear is about to be repeated. And regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum, one thing I think we can all agree about is that the status quo is no longer an option. It is not sustainable. The current arrangements for funding for local government are not fit for purpose. Some would have us think that the answer lies in, cutting taxes, cutting regulations, cutting out the waste, and that this is somehow going to boost economic growth. But I think this audience actually knows better than anyone that you can't cut your way to growth, especially when you're already cut to the bone in local government. And we know that delivering economic growth depends on having good infrastructure. We know it needs well-maintained roads, affordable transport, sustainable care services, high quality education and skills delivery, a healthy population who inhabit decent housing and live in safe communities. You know, we all know where we want to get to. So let me be really clear that, you know, talk of cuts, we condemn them and we will fight back against them, whatever the source of the decision is and whatever level that lies at, without fear or favour. We're preparing ourselves for a fight because we can see it coming. And I want to remind all politicians, particularly at government level, that the people of Scotland really are demanding better. They want to see the change that was promised to them. And we in the trade union movement are not going to stand silent while austerity continues to wreck our communities, while working people are increasingly feeling betrayed and forgotten. We need to see really urgent, radical action, because every single cut made, every promise broken, every opportunity to act that's been missed kills off people's hope and trust in our very politics. It's poisoning our democracy, and it's a gift to the far right. So here in Scotland, when our teachers are pushed to the point of balloting for industrial action over workloads, it's time to act. When bad bosses and contractors routinely flout fair work agreements and still receive public funding, it's time to act. When our social care services are in crisis and workers are falling short of £15 an hour that they should have been getting a decade ago, it's definitely time to act. Last year, the STUC, alongside Tax Justice Scotland, revealed the staggering extent of the wealth gap, with just 5 families in Scotland having as much wealth as a quarter of our population. With these levels of inequality, I think the days of politicians being all things to all people are over. Our communities want politicians who are prepared to stand up to the bosses and the billionaires. They want to see investment in our public services, not cuts. They want to see their energy prices coming down, not being raised by the latest warmongering whims of Mr. Trump. And the evidence that shows what I'm saying is growing. Just last week, I attended the launch of key research from the Wellbeing Economy Alliance in Scotland, conducted with the Diffley Partnership. And it asked over 2,200 Scots from every walk of life a very essential question. What do you really think about wealth, inequality and wealth taxation? And the findings were compelling, and I'd like you to remember these. Go and look at this research and talk about them wherever you can, because this is what's going to give our political leaders some confidence to be radical. 83% of Scots thought the gap between the richest and the poorest is too wide. 90% believe the current levels of wealth inequality are harmful to society. 85% support increasing taxes on the wealthy. 66% said they believed increasing taxes was preferable and investing in public services was the way to go over reducing taxes and accepting further cuts to our public services. Now, this research can't be ignored, least of all by Scotland's political class. People want change, and if the politicians fail to deliver, then bad faith actors and those who want to sow unity, disruption and disharmony in our communities are standing there. Because be under no illusions, the road of ever-increasing inequality is the road to ruin for our democracy. Those in our communities who feel abandoned and forgotten need to believe that they've got government fighting their corner, and that means government taking real action now. Raising the taxes needed to close the £5 billion funding gap, not cutting 12,000 more public sector jobs and calling it efficiency savings. Replacing the unfair council tax system as soon as possible. And we need the revaluation of 35 years without a revaluation of land and property. We need to get together and we need to get this sorted. I'm fed up with the excuses of we need a consensus, this party wants to, that party doesn't. We need to get together and to get you all in a room immediately after the election to really move this agenda forward quickly. ending the £3 billion annual profit drain from outsourced public services. We've just completed a piece of research that shows £2 to £3 billion in profits are going to the private sector from outsourced public services. Let's have a look at that. Is that really the best value for our public purse? Or could those profits be reinvested in our communities rather than siphoned off to shareholders? Extending sectoral collective bargaining to care, that's great, but we need the budget to go with the bargaining. Using public money to create good jobs, domestic supply chains, not blank cheques for businesses with no conditions attached. Taking equity stakes in offshore wind, bringing more of our onshore wind back into public and community ownership. Bringing buses back into public hands. No profits, so profits can be reinvested in routes and services. Look at Lothian buses, not extracted by shareholders and not reinvested. Now, we already know that progressive measures like these can work. Local government has a key role to play in helping to make that wish list happen. Look at Lothian buses, look at the outstanding service it provides, and look at how they reinvest the profits in the communities, thanks to the work done there and by City of Edinburgh Council. Look at the vast profits from the onshore wind farms being generated for Orkney Council because they own the wind farm and they are able to reinvest that back into the community, not line shareholders' pockets. Look at the progressive income tax changes that Scottish Government have made so far that created an additional 1.7 billion in revenue for the Scottish budget, and it didn't cause any of the negative impact on migration for higher skilled jobs that the doomsayers predicted. We've not seen any evidence of that. So we can no longer afford for these examples to be the isolated examples of how things could be. We need to be bold, we need to be brave, and we need to act fast for our people. The Scottish Parliament elections are coming and the Scottish people are going to face some key choices. And some of those choices are going to be based on the false promises of the far right. And in times like these, every progressive force in Scotland needs to unite with those of every party, union, religion, sex, race and more coming together to celebrate our diversity and stand together and look forward. The decisions made by our mainstream politicians in the coming weeks on tax, on public services and on whose side our politicians are on are going to be crucial for generations to come. We need to rebuild trust. We need to show people that there are solutions, that there is a path to a better, fairer Scotland, and that we can have people in government that stand ready and prepared to deliver. Not flag waving, not scapegoating, not vague promises or nostalgia for a past that's not coming back. Scotland's people need better than that. So let's face forward. Let's no longer accept the script being written for us by the bosses, the billionaires, or any of those that we, the people of Scotland, the people that serve our communities, can be the authors of our own future. And it's time to start writing that story right now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. Look, we know that across Scotland, transformation is picking up pace in local government. Scottish councils are leading the way. We can't say that as confidently across the whole of the UK. So there's some really exciting work going on in local government in Scotland. But we know that part of that transformation is that we have to have very honest conversations. We have to have robust debate. And I think, you know, Ros, that was a really helpful contribution to exactly that, trying to be sort of clear-eyed and having a sort of robust position that people can respond to. So I'm going to take questions now. There are questions obviously in the room. There are also people online who I can't read, but Team COSLA will tell me if there are online questions going through and wave at me and ventriloquize those conversations. But let's start in the room. Have I got anyone want to ask a question or make a brief point? I've got a gentleman in the front table.
I'm Peter Barrett, Perthinkin, Ross councillor. I'd like to ask what you think the solutions are to the recruitment problems and challenges in health and social care. We've been well aware of the problems on the front line going back for probably 2 decades or more, and councils have tried really hard innovative ways of addressing those. But we're now seeing at the very top level problems of recruitment at chief officer level for IGBs. There was a recent audit commission report to Clackmannanshire and Stirling's inability or failure to appoint a chief officer formally. My council, Perth and Kinross, we're now going for a second iteration of trying to recruit suitable candidates to interview for that post. And what do you think are the issues behind that? You know, is it, as Paul Kelly, the Health and Social Care spokesperson, said, you know, is it the failure of the Scottish Government to deliver on the £750 million that we asked for in the budget for social care, and the impact that has on actually managing those operations? Or is it things like the really, really onerous micromanagement of the CRAG process, or is it something else?
I'm going to ask you to answer that, and then while people think of more questions, and then I'll move to taking questions in little bunches. But why don't we come back on that first? What is the barrier to that? You know, why are we struggling so much, particularly at senior level, to find candidates? Well,
I think probably they're very hard jobs to do in the current context, and I think that's, you know, going to be part of it actually. You know, to give someone a pretty impossible task in a situation where you've got a service in crisis doesn't particularly make some of those posts highly attractive. I'm not a specialist in senior officer posts, but what I do know is right across health and social care, we have a problem with staff not being remunerated at the proper level for the work that they do. So, you know, I'm much more concerned, to be honest with you, about those in the frontline posts and the pay that they're getting. And we've known for quite some time that there is a difference between the level of skills required to do that job and the challenge of that job compared to the package that people are being offered to take on that work. And so I think that, you know, there could be all sorts of issues in there about development. I'm obviously not an industrial officer within local authorities, so it's a much more big picture model that I would look at. But I also think that we need to think about the actual way that we look at immigration as well for Scotland. You know, I think that there is an issue with immigration. We've had a lot of issues with migrant workers in social care and real problems for them. We've been working with the Scottish Government to sort through some of that. But I'm much, you know, I'll be honest with you, I'm much more afraid with the issues that are affecting those on the ground and in the front line in service.
We'll come back to some of those issues about pay and other questions. And by the way, Peter very adeptly did something I forgot to remind you to do, which was to introduce yourself when you make a point. So thank you, and everyone follow his lead. I had a question in the table over there.
Mark Flynn, Dundee City Council leader. You mentioned progressive taxation and the success of the Scottish version. You see that being a lead for the UK to take on board the consequences for them, Peter?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the UK government have got a lot to do on taxation. They're the ones that have some of the biggest levers, you know, let's face it, and there's a whole suite of areas that they could be looking at. I mean, I think we have to be very cautious about going too far with income tax being the answer. It happens to be the bit that's devolved to Scotland, but actually there's a lot more scope devolved to local authority level for tax raising. But, you know, the things like wealth taxes, etc., would be best delivered at UK level, and there are a whole range of measures that we would certainly be encouraging the UK government to look at, because they also have an issue with how are we going to sustainably fund our public services. And I think we have to have a very grown-up debate about balanced taxation. We have a situation in the UK where the richest 20% of people proportionately pay far less tax than the poorest 20% of people in our society. And that is just not fair. It's not balanced, it's not appropriate, and it's no way to run a modern well-being economy. And if that's what we're all saying we're signed up to, then we need to look at those measures.
So thank you, Mark. Thank you. Just just very briefly, Ross, what, let's expand that point. You said there's a wider range of taxation measures you would encourage UK government to look at. What would some of those be?
Well, there's all sorts of corporate taxes. There's taxes that investors make on investments. Policies. The key thing that we're looking at as well is, taxes around assets. So there's a number of taxes like inheritance taxes, etc., that are UK level. A lot of these things need to be looked at further. I think we could go further on a whole range of.
And then coming right back to the other end of the telescope, you talk about what involved to councils. What do you think councils?
Well, we have actually proposed a range of measures. One of the biggies is obviously, as I mentioned, the council tax. We need a revaluation of land and property. It's been 35 years since we've done that. We need to do that. The STUC actually produced a paper last year that had a suite of £3.7 billion of additional revenues that could be raised. But almost £1 billion of that was if we introduced a proportional property tax. And that would include measures to safeguard low-income families who live in high-value homes. But still, that's a significant input that we could be looking at making. My worry is I've spent the last 5 years at every single First Minister meeting, every single meeting with ministers banging on about this, and we are still seeing no movement on it. We can't afford not to see any movement on this any longer. Just can't go on like this.
Right. We're at our sort of coming to our scheduled end time, but we did start a little late, so I'm gonna unilaterally seize it. Sorry, COSLA. Can I just check with COSLA colleagues whether are there any questions coming in on the
Yeah,
right. And then I've got you and wanting to come in over there, but can I just see an indication of other hands that I might need to? All right, see, this is what happens here. We get towards the end and suddenly everyone's got a question. Okay, I've got 3, so I'll take them all at once and then deal with you. So Ewan at the centre back.
No, thank you for your presentation. So one of my first questions was, you talked about the far right. I think also we need to start talking about the far left as well. We can't just say far right without saying the far left. But also he talks about taxation and taxing those who are successful, those who have demonstrated success. Is that not actually putting us in a position where success gets penalised and putting where we don't want to be a country that's vibrant? And I don't think that's something that's appropriate. I think we need to say, talk up, be successful. We won't just take everything from you. You can actually put back into society in other ways. So see that.
Then over here.
I'd like to hear your views on the demographics of the workforce. It's obviously aging rapidly, and what your thoughts as to how, as the name of this presentation is the future public services workforce, how that's going to change and adapt to the demographic pressures we have.
It's a really important question. And did I see another hand sort of in the corner towards the station? No. Okay. So then on the tax question, it's the age-old debate, isn't it? Taxation versus and I don't want to get, we are talking about the future of public services, not just about tax. So briefly on tax, and then I'd really like to pick up the question
about demographics,
because that's so important, right? We know that we have an aging population, which creates pressure on local government in all sorts of ways. We also have an aging workforce in local government. So that's a massive challenge for the future. So don't want to close down the debate, but quickly on tax, more lengthily on demographics.
Well, the thing about tax is it's proportionate, isn't it? So at the end of the day, we're not talking about taking a higher proportion of wealth off those at the top end than those at the bottom end. They'd still have plenty left over. And actually, that's why I would commend the We All Scotland research to you, because what it showed, it actually took people at different income levels, different socio-economic backgrounds, and it showed that, even where the answers were 90% across the piece, even those in the top income brackets, it was still sitting at like 80%. So what it showed is that there's a high pride and commitment across the Scottish population for that social contract. People want a fairer Scotland, and they're prepared to, they're maybe ahead of the politicians actually in terms of that issue around taxation in a way that perhaps isn't well enough talked about and known. So I would ask you all to take a look at that. In terms
the
of
debate will continue.
yeah, it certainly will.
The demographics, yeah.
In terms of demographics, I completely agree. I mean, I would say that if population is a serious issue, and if we want people to be more inclined to have children and you know, really long-term demographics, then we need people to feel they have sustainable lives, and that means, you know, the cost of living being manageable. That means people's standard of living being able to keep up with the basics in order to think about having kids. But we also need to crack the migration question. Scotland's got plenty of room for more people. If we really want to boost our economy, we actually need to start talking up immigration as a positive, and actually, you know, that is a real positive for our society in Scotland. It's a positive if we want to take advantage of all the opportunities for economic growth. So, you know, there are opportunities there to look at that, and that's something I think we have to have a serious conversation about and turn some of those arguments on their head.
I mean, immigration is a lever. Some of the other stuff there is quite long term.
Yes,
Are
yes.
there other, you know, I'm thinking if you are sitting in a council right now worrying about how many people are due to retire over the next couple of years, you don't have that immigration lever, you don't have the long term. What could people be doing to encourage a sort of people into the workforce today, tomorrow?
So we've obviously got I mean, there are employability problems within our society, economic activity. We have a lot of young people who we need to look at their education and training and support and how we can create more opportunities for them. And actually, because of the levels of poverty, etc., that we've seen in particular areas of Scotland, you know, that can make people quite far away from the labour market, as we know. So it's even more pressure on councils. I appreciate that, to take interventions to bring people closer to the labour market. That's exactly why we need to invest in local government, because you actually have the answers. It's you that provide the services to some of the most vulnerable, to equip them to be part of the workforce, to help contribute to society. So, you know, for me, you can't get some of those answers without some serious investment in some of the key services that local government delivers.
We're out of time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for those range of interesting questions on an interesting range of issues. Look, so much going on across all of these issues that LGIU will continue to sort of work with you, our members, and supply the sort of research and info that hopefully will help you to navigate that. But for now, everybody, Ross Fire.